Ukrainian intelligence shows that the North Koreans are merely days away from being deployed to the front lines. Just how bad could this get for Ukraine? And more importantly, what is the U.S.'s strong response to this dangerous escalation? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get disappointed. All right, so this is a troubling development. President Zelensky has said that the first North Korean soldiers are expected to be deployed by Russia to combat zones as early as October 27th or 28th. This is according to Zelensky's official Twitter account. And this is part of the North Korean contingent of about 10,000 troops who are being sent to fight alongside Russian forces. And the Ukrainians claim about 3,000 North Koreans are training currently at bases in Russia. So the thinking is that, in all likelihood, the first deployment will likely be some kind of small contingent of North Koreans who are going to at least begin to scout out the positions, begin to interface with their Russian components. It's an advanced party. And then you're going to see probably this 3,000-man brigade take up a portion of the front line. And then you're going to see more and more, in all likelihood, North Koreans as they gain combat experience and as they acquit themselves, right? Because here's what the Russian military doesn't want to have happen. They don't want to send these North Koreans in to hold a position in the battlefield and then have them collapse the first sign of trouble, right? So what they're likely going to do is either phase them in, likely probably integrate them with a Russian unit, or maybe their officers will get integrated with a Russian unit. They'll watch carefully how it happens. And then the Russian unit will the North Koreans will send their soldiers up. And then the Russians will withdraw after a couple of days, leaving the North Koreans in the positions. And so once that happens, right, I think that's where you're going to see the real test begin. So I'd say we're at least 2 weeks away from actually combat testing these North Koreans. A troubling part, and there's a lot of troubling parts about this. One is that they're fresh combat troops, right? They're young, they're in shape, they're significant, and while they may not have necessarily the advanced tactical training that a Western military might give their troops, they're still a military, and they are still much more physically capable than the median Russian soldier right now. You also have troubling developments such as fighter pilots. The North Korean fighter pilots are reportedly also being deployed in this conflict, which is itself pretty fascinating, right? North Korean pilots have very limited experience and are flying generally somewhat older aircraft. But one report from South Korea says that the ground troop deployment might also accompany combat missions. And this would make sense, right? Russia would be the first overseas combat deployment for North Korea's pilots since the Vietnam War. But they reportedly operated in Syria and Egypt during the Yom Kippur War. And this is, again, something that would be really valuable for North Korea and its air crews because they, again, lack this combat experience, and you would have instead a North Korean contingent that can learn directly from the very experienced Russian contingent. So this is the same reason that North Korea wants to get its troops on the ground, accruing combat experience, is the same reason it wants to see its pilots get experience in flying real combat sorties, especially given the fact those pilots will be facing down, so to speak, Western air defenses, something that they would expect to be the environment that they encounter should they fly against South Korean forces. Now, before we talk about just what the U.S.'s response is, I want to mention that if you're interested in seeing some GoPro footage from the front lines, the International Legion dropped a pretty awesome video of their Operation Shovel. It's a combination of GoPro and drone footage. But we're doing the analysis, right, on combatvetnews.com. Whenever there's uncensored combat footage that we want to analyze, this is where it drops. Twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, members get access to that footage, as well as a huge archive of hundreds of videos of additional combat footage from really up to the full 2 years of the war. So if you're interested, right, become a member. This is the best way to support the channel. Basically, all the proceeds go to support me and the team here. And it functions as essentially my Patreon. So if you're interested, check it out, combatvetnews.com, or the link is in the description. Now, here's what frustrates me. And I've talked about this ad nauseum, but my outrage budget, so to speak, is still not expended. The U.S. has worked tirelessly, and they've really pulled their punches in this war in order to ensure that escalation doesn't happen. And their fear would be escalation would be the expansion of the war to include third-party belligerents, right? And so that's why we've refrained from allowing Ukraine to hit Russian territory. Something that Putin, of course, escalated long before and then the U.S. said, oh, I guess we have to respond to this. Then you had things like cluster munitions, something the Russians deployed on day one that the U.S. said, oh, okay, well, I guess we have to do this too, right? And so on and so forth, right? Consistently, there has been one party who is engaged in systematic escalation, and then you have the United States who has in turn begrudgingly got drug along, right? And the U.S. has to acknowledge at this point that their core goal with not escalating this conflict has failed, right? Every time Putin has escalated at his timeline when he feels it's most ready to do so. And so now we have 3,000 North Korean troops, or up to 10,000 North Korean troops, that are entering the conflict, right? And this is the actual stance of the United States in response to this dangerous escalation by two of the U.S.'s sworn adversaries. They said, well, if North Korea goes to Ukraine, they're fair game. They're fair targets. And the Ukrainian military, they'll defend themselves against North Koreans the same way they're defending themselves against Russian soldiers. Lloyd Austin was even more strongly worded. He said, yeah, there's evidence that there are DPRK troops in Russia. And if they're co-belligerents, if their intentions to participate in this war on Russia's behalf, it's a very, very serious issue, and it will have impacts not only in Europe, but it will impact things in the Indo-Pacific as well. So that's it. That's what the U.S. is going to do about it. Nothing. Strongly worded statements. And good luck to the Ukrainian military. This is absolutely just insufferable. Just really the U.S.'s unwillingness to support its allies, its commitment to absolute lip service, its unwillingness, its willingness to put its head in the sand and pretend like you can just appease someone like Putin, especially that you can appease him through pulling your own punches by feigning weakness. This is sort of preposterous, right? And again, this is not me. This is a criticism of the folks currently in the White House, but I want to be clear that as you think about this election, Trump has said Putin would never have invaded if he was president. Okay, sure. Then why is his plan to end the war to give Putin everything he wants? Wouldn't a strong, capable leader get Putin to pack up his bags and leave Ukraine? Right? Wouldn't that be something a strong leader would do? Whereas a weak leader would just say, oh, you invaded your neighbor. Oh, you broke into his house and are sitting in his living room. Well, I guess it's your living room now, buddy. Right? So again, think hard when you go to the polls if you give a shit about Ukraine. And I'm not going to sit there and tell you that both sides are not the same. And I have grave issues with both sides. But man, Jesus Christ, this is a fucking train wreck. All right? And somebody should actually try to, I don't know, do something about it. Anyway, that's all I had, guys. Thanks to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Brown, Sergei Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gortz, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, all the folks at the lieutenant and colonel tier members of combatvetnews.com. See you in the next one. Cheers.